Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have John Fugelsang back with us. We'll chat with John in just a moment, but first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So John Fugelsang has been murdered on CSI and picketed by the Westboro Baptist Church. He's a Drama League-nominated actor, comedian, and broadcaster who's hosted many TV shows and podcasts, including the acclaimed Tell Me Everything series on SiriusXM Progress. He's gotten George Harrison to give his final performance on VH1. He's debated Jerry Falwell and David Duke, and made many appearances on MSNBC, Fox News, and CNN. His epic PBS road trip film on the American Dream, Dream On, was named Best Documentary at the New York Independent Film Festival. And he's here to discuss his terrific new book, Separation of Church and Hate, a sane person's guide to taking back the Bible from fundamentalists, fascists, and flock-fleecing frauds. John, welcome back into the back room.
What a pleasure, Andy. Thank you for lowering your standards this much yet again for me. Thank you.
Congratulations on the success of the book, Separation of Church and Hate. I blew through it in a couple of days, and man, this religion thing, crazy.
Oh, don't you think? Yeah. Wow. I mean, Jesus and Abraham Lincoln both had their operations taken over by the same people who killed him, Rome and the Confederates. You know, I mean, it's crazy. And it's actually interesting. I'm getting a much more pious level of death threats now that I've written this extensive book about scripture. But thank you.
You never want to stop growing and evolving with your death threats.
No, it's really true. It took a long time for this book. I spent from the time I first sent my first proposal to publication was about 15 years, because for a long time I had publishers and agents telling me it's a book for believers and atheists together about how to use the Bible against right-wing Christians? What? I mean, years ago, I had a publisher in New York say, I don't know any fundamentalist Christians. They don't impact my life in any way. Why do I need a book like this? But I wanted to write this for anybody of any spiritual background or agnosticism or atheist who ever has to deal with a far right-wing Christian in their home, their family, their job, their school board, or their national government. Because right-wing Christianity doesn't follow Jesus. They don't care about religious freedom. They're not here to serve God. They care about conservative Christian power. That is the only thing they value. And so if they're going to use this Bible and weaponize it to get more power, we're allowed to actually quote the Jesus parts and see if they really mean it.
And man, you quote the Jesus parts. There's a lot of good quotes in that book. I mean, the book is so good. I loved it. And as they say, I laughed, I cried, I got angry.
It was very nice to get like 7 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list with something that is this, inflammatory. But I think it's the most commercial thing I've ever done. I mean, and I've hosted America's Funniest Home Videos.
I mean, that's a really interesting point. Why is it so popular? Have you struck a chord with something that a lot of people don't want to talk about?
Yeah, I thought for a long time that, look, I was raised abnormally Catholic, right? My mother was an ex-nun. My father was a Franciscan brother. And they didn't kiss the ring too hard. They didn't make us go to confession, things like that. But we were very, very religious. And I grew up being taught that Christianity is about the stuff that Jesus teaches and commands in his parts of the book. That Christians aren't supposed to follow the Bible. Christians are supposed to follow Christ. And Jesus's teachings are about humility and servant leadership and going to the margins to help the less fortunate. And how you treat the lowest of the low is how you treat Jesus. And millions of us grow up in this country to find this movement of love and empathy is hijacked by this self-serving, white supremacist, deeply shitty, tax-free clique. And, that's why I think they say the largest growing religious demographic in our country are Mormons, or some say it's Islam, some say none of the above. I think the largest growing religious group in our country, and I wish Democrats would realize this, is people who were raised religious and now consider themselves spiritual because they're so turned off to the hypocrisy and cruelty of so much of organized religion, which is all about fundamentalism It's not about Jesus.
Well, you do such a great job at just being literal and looking in the Bible and saying, here it is, or here it isn't. And that was a big takeaway for me, which is more about like what isn't in the Bible that, after how many centuries or whatever, people think is actually in the Bible.
Oh, you must be referring to abortion, which is never specifically mentioned and never banned and never criticized. And there are zero penalties for terminating a pregnancy. And there's a good reason for that, Andy. And the reason is that Jesus's religion of Judaism never bans it. And that's why abortions are legal and free in Israel today. God asserts in Exodus, right, that a fetus is property and that a woman's life has more value in God's eye than a fetus. I'm not saying people have to believe any of this literally. I'm saying this is the book we've all agreed on. This is the book they're using to get power. So God gives abortion tips for unfaithful pregnant wives in Numbers chapter 5 to induce miscarriage. At Passover kind of tells me God's not that big a fan of innocent children. Jesus is against the death penalty more than once, never mentions abortion. Abortions existed in the time of the Bible. In Jeremiah's lament, he wishes that they had killed him in the womb, which indicates this is something that was done back then. We know historically they terminated pregnancies. And yet God never saw fit in the book to have Moses or Jesus or Paul or Elisha or any of the prophets ever say, thou shalt force women to be pregnant against their will. Jesus never says, governments of men should force 14-year-old girls to remain pregnant after being raped by their stepdad. And it only became an issue in the late 70s. Jerry Falwell never mentioned abortion until 5 years after Roe v. Wade. It was considered a Catholic thing back then. The most controversial thing about it was that it wasn't controversial. It wasn't until after Reagan was elected that abortion became the number one issue, next to being cruel to gay people, for right-wing Christianity. And Andy, within 45 years of Reagan's election, we now see that it's completely erased in this country the teachings of Jesus. They got the followers of Christ to vote against everything Christ ever talked about by talking about abortion, which Christ never talked about. And that is the crown jewel in the right-wing Christianity kingdom of bullshit. I'm not saying that the Bible's pro-abortion, that Jesus would be a clinic escort, none of that stuff. But they have redefined the religion based on something that doesn't appear in the Bible. And the stuff that Jesus does talk about, they ignore or call woke.
Well, this is a really interesting subject because there are other things you talk about in the book that aren't in the Bible, which I want to get to in a little bit. But how does it happen where over time people have just sort of created this image of a book and what's in it that just doesn't exist? What makes that happen? Is it politicians who just feed them this bullshit that their religious beliefs dictate that they shouldn't like this or like that?
Politicians and religious leaders, yeah. Like homophobia is pretty much forbidden by Jesus by the end of the Sermon on the Mount, and there's no part of the Bible anyone can use to say that being gay is a sin. Let me say that again. There's no part of the Bible that Christ followers can use to say that being gay is bad. Jesus brings a new covenant. So all that stuff in Leviticus about shall not lie man with a man, that's an abomination. Well, Leviticus 20:10 commands you to stone adulterers to death, but I don't see too many MAGA Christians bringing rocks to Mar-a-Lago, if you know what I'm saying. It's the picking and choosing, which everyone does. Mm-hmm. Every member of every religion picks and chooses the parts of their holy books that they think sound true to them, and that's fine. But when you're picking and choosing to be cruel to people, when you're picking and choosing parts of books you don't follow, I mean, Leviticus tells you that, you have to kill people if they work on Saturday. You're not allowed to have tattoos. Yeah, you got to be kosher. When you're picking and choosing parts of that book and weaponizing it to hurt a minority that the Jesus guy commands you to love, don't come to me saying you're a Christ follower because you put up a tree in your house once a year and hate Muslims. I mean, you don't have to even believe in Jesus as a literal fact to use his teachings against these guys, because the teachings of Jesus are as threatening to authoritarian power today as they were 2,000 years ago. I'm not even talking about divinity and miracles, just the stuff that came out of the guy's mouth. And that's why conservatives never quote Jesus. They never fight to put Jesus quotes on the side of a building or a courthouse. They worship him because that's a lot easier than following all those inconveniently woke commandments he dished out.
The title of the book is indeed provocative. What made you frame it around hate versus perhaps a softer and more accessible framing?
Because I didn't want, it's a great question, and you're the first person to ask that. I didn't want this to be an attack on nice conservative Christians. They're not the same. There's nice conservative Christians who I don't agree with, and we get along just great. And I think most of your audience has family members, and they can relate to this. I think most of us grew up in families where, they don't always agree on politics, but we still love each other, we still get along. And I say in the introduction to this book to any conservative brothers and sisters reading it that I'm grateful, and that I know they won't agree with anything I say, but I also know they won't hate me with the violent bloodlust for it. It's the haters. It's the ones who get off on cruelty. That's who I'm going after with this book. The ones who use Christianity as a cloaking device for douchebaggery and cruelty. And that was the target I go after in this one, not the nice conservative people. They won't love this book, but they're not going to hate me for it. And conservative Christians are going to have to deal with these far right wingers too.
In the book, you cite scripture. Is that the best means of challenging Christian conservatives, Christian nationalism, using verbatim quotes and passages from the Bible itself?
Well, I think it's the most effective way to show that they don't actually follow the Jesus parts of this book they wave around so bombastically. And, if they're going to stand in our house and use their First Amendment to say that we get to impose our opinions, our devotion to Jesus on government, then we're allowed to use that same First Amendment and check to see if they really mean it. They don't want religious freedom. They want to impose a very narrow version of the Bible on the rest of us in culture, in politics, in every level of our civic society. And besides the fact that this is revoltingly against the express wishes of the founders who, for all their flaws, wrote it down several times in several different places that we were not supposed to be a Christian nation, they're still fighting to do it. And, show me where your right-wing Christian organization fights to help the poor. Show me where you do any of the stuff that Jesus talks about. It's a drag show for them. Jesus is very specific in Matthew 25, the judgment of nations, parable of the goats and the sheep, it's also called, where he gives his marching orders and says, individuals and nations. This is the famous one where I was thirsty and you gave me some drink. I was hungry and you fed me. This is where Jesus pretty much gives his orders on what's going to make a Christian nation. And he has 4 basic criteria. You care for the poor, you care for the sick, you welcome the stranger, and you are kind to people in prison. And that's it. Nothing about screaming at women outside clinics, nothing about persecuting migrants, nothing about how much money you gave to your church or how much you hated the libs. Those 4 things. And so, in the case of the Bible, if you're going to say that you're a Christian and you want a Christian nation, but all you're fighting for is for your clique to have more power and be on top, if you're going to say that you want to criminalize abortion because you're so damn Christian, but you support which Jesus never mentioned, but you support the state murdering prisoners, which Jesus specifically opposed, the rest of us are no longer obliged to take your claims of Christian piety seriously. And you don't have to believe in any of the Bible as literal fact to use it when debating these folks. But even more than that, we all have some of these people in our families, the hardcore, right? The ones who think vaccines make you gay, right? And here's what I find. If we engage these people on scripture itself, rather than just saying, oh, Uncle Racist is here. If we engage them on the scripture itself, something funny happens. You won't sway them, okay? You may sway their wives and their kids and everybody else at the cookout or the Thanksgiving dinner, but they may appreciate that you took the time to engage them in terms of scripture. I will always believe, Andy, that you get a lot farther showing your uncle how Jesus was not an immigrant-hating homophobe than if we just haul off and call our uncle an immigrant-hating homophobe.
Yeah, that sounds like it probably would work a little bit better. So let's talk about Christian hypocrisy overall. You write something in the book like, most of the religious fanatics haven't actually read the Bible and are counting on you having not read it either.
That's it.
Yeah.
And I really learned that in the last few years on my SiriusXM show, talking with our MAGA Christian brethren. You know, I've learned you don't have to debate these people. You can make them debate the Bible. You know, like immigration. God commands us throughout the Old Testament to welcome the stranger. He's not ambiguous about it. God even forbids us from ever mistreating the alien. We have to treat the alien among us as one of our own. God's quite specific about this more than once in the Hebrew Scriptures. And then his kid comes along, and again, I'm not asking anybody to take any of this literally. But Jesus comes along, Matthew 6:5, individuals and nations judged by how they welcome the stranger. So, you know, my question is to my uncle, why should I listen to you and Donald Trump and reject God and Jesus? You don't have to fight them. You can make them debate the Bible.
But they don't know the Bible, is really what you're saying.
I always ask the MAGA friends, please tell me one actual teaching of Christ that Donald Trump or your movement fight for legislatively. Give me one. And if you ask this question, Andy, you'll find out how little these folks know the book. Because the first thing I always get is abortion.
Of course.
I gotta say, no, Bible's not against it. Jesus is against the death penalty. Oh, they don't like that. So then they're like, where? And I'm like, Sermon on the Mount, turn the other cheek. He stops an execution. He says only sinless people are allowed to execute. Forgive people who hurt you 70 times 7. I could do this all day. They want to believe what they want to believe. They've recreated Jesus in their own image, and he's white with blue eyes in the Middle East, and he hates who they hate. So it's like, you know, they don't follow it. And if they don't follow it, they're just using it as camouflage for a movement based on power. And I wrote this book to be camouflage removal. We don't need to hate these people. We can hate them. But in a democracy, we have to beat them. And they have been hiding behind the Bible for my entire life. And the Democratic Party's terrified to engage on these terms. The media is never going to do that. The media is never going to ask Mike Pence, where does Jesus chase the gay wedding cakes out of the temple? It's going to be up to the rest of us to remind them that hate is not a Christian value.
Yeah. And, you know, the hypocrisy is so widespread. It's so blatant. It's so shameless. Does it ever shock you? I mean, you've been talking about this for years and years and years, but do you ever just stop and go, my God, this is insanity?
Not anymore, because this is what fundamentalism is, right? When my atheist friends are all about, oh, the Bible's all responsible, religion's responsible for all the oppression of women and hate and violence, and I certainly can see why people think that. But religion didn't invent hate. Hate found a safe harbor inside religion. And it's always the extreme right wing of all the religions, the fundamentalists, that are the ones who are ruining all the world's great religions. Judaism, Christianity, Islam. The more to the right your religion is, the more you believe women are second-class citizens, the more conservative any religion is. God just likes men more. 51% of the population, a little bit inferior. The more to the right your religion is, the more you have the sex hang-ups. Women, gay people enjoying sex. The more to the right your religion is, the more you think violence is acceptable and killing is acceptable when my side does it, because I'm on the side of the one true God. And if you oppose me, you obviously represent Satan, and God won't mind me hurting Satan. The more to the right your religion is, the more there's a focus always on punishment instead of healing. And the more there's this victim mentality, Andy, this persecution narrative that's used by fundamentalists to justify any kind of cruelty. You know, like the Jesus of the Bible, it's sort of like, well, this bad thing was done to me. I don't want it to happen to anyone else. Fundamentalism believes this bad thing was done to me, so I'm allowed to do it back.
Well, you know, on the subject of hypocrisy, I was jogging this week listening to your book. And I had to stop a couple of times and go back and listen to this thing you said, because it just hit me in a way that it's like, whoa. And you were talking about Bernie Sanders when he ran for president. People across the political spectrum wondered if America would vote for or was ready for a socialist Jew. Let me remind you that we celebrate the birthday of a socialist Jew every December 25th. I mean, that's pretty genius.
You know, I mean, is Jesus a socialist? Not technically, because that wasn't invented yet. But you put up the tenets of socialism versus the tenets of modern MAGA crony capitalism and tell me what's closer to the actual teachings of Christ. I mean, Acts of the Apostles is like a blueprint for an opt-in communist, community. So it's like, And I like America having a blended economy. I mean, we did great in the 50s because we had so much capitalism and so much socialism happening at the same time. But yeah, it's all the demonization. It's all the hypocrisy. Jesus is so explicitly against wealth, against accumulation of wealth, constantly warns people about it. And yet you got these like prosperity gospel churches. And I don't group Joel Osteen in with these bigots and haters, right? Like Joel Osteen he's not a racist. He's not a Christian nationalist. But this prosperity gospel nonsense they're selling now, oh, if you're faithful to the Lord and donate to our church, God will reward you with material blessings in this life. That's some serious weapons-grade bullshit that appears nowhere in the actual Bible, and certainly not with Jesus. Jesus is nonstop warning you against possessions.
Jesus didn't have a 1-800 number?
Oh, believe it or not, he did not. No. He didn't even have a decent Bitcoin to sell, Andy, this guy. But like, you know, this whole notion that God's going to give you material shit because you're such a great person is against everything Jesus says. Jesus' whole thing is Christianity is not about what you get. It's about what you give, what you do. The whole movement is supposed to be about service, helping the less fortunate. However you treat the lowest is how you treat him, right? It's not about getting cool shit. And when you're messaging that, oh, if you're a good person, God will give you blessings. What you're really messaging, and Falwell and the televangelists all did this, is hard times, economic downturn. That's a sign that you're spiritually insufficient, right? If good times means God loves you, then bad times must mean God doesn't like you too much. And that is the toxic theology of the prosperity gospel, but it's very seductive. It's a lot more seductive than Jesus saying, pick up your cross and follow me. It's not going to be fun, kids.
Mm-hmm. There's a part in the book that I really, really loved, and that was when you talk about what the Bible does and doesn't forbid. Give us a little taste of that.
There's a lot of it. Where do you want to narrow it down to? I mean, the Bible itself has lots of beauty. The Bible itself has lots of gorgeous morality and poetry, but the Bible's a mirror. Whatever you want to see in it, someone will see. If you want to see oppression of women, if you want to see women as second-class citizens, if you want to see homosexuals condemned, if you want to see violence and wrath and authoritarian male power, it's all in there. But if you want to see love and forgiveness and acceptance and grace and going to the margins to help people who can't help you, that's in there too. Everyone picks which Bible they want to follow, right? That's the real thing about it. And that's, I mean, so in terms of what the Bible says about what you can't do, I mean, where do you want to begin? Like, if you're going to say you believe in the Bible as literal fact, and that's why you're against gay people, because Leviticus 18 says man with a man is an abomination. Well, Leviticus also says you're not allowed to ever get tattoos. You're not allowed to ever men cut your hair at the temples. You got to be good Jews. You got to be kosher as well. You have to stone to death people who work on Saturday. Bye-bye NASCAR. You have to stone to death children who are gluttons or drunks. I'm so going to miss Don Jr. You have to stone to death adulterers, and that includes divorce and remarriage, according to the Bible. They don't follow it. They don't believe in it. And that's what I say all the time when someone quotes Leviticus to justify their anti-gay hang-ups, and I'm like, you don't believe in it? You don't live by it? You ain't kosher. Do you enjoy bacon? How's your foreskin looking? Like, they don't follow it, but they'll pick and choose one line and then ignore the rest. Like it's the words well-regulated militia in the Second Amendment. These people pick and choose to justify their own selfish preferences. And it's very human, but we have to beat these people. They are frauds. And, we have to, I don't believe in hate. I don't believe in being cruel to them. If they're in power and mean, I'll do mean jokes. That's my job. But it's up to us. The entire history of Christianity, right, ever since Rome took over, is when they began the Crusades, they first realized, hey, here's how you get power. Let's use Jesus to get power and then do the opposite of Jesus for Jesus. So the Crusades are slaughtering pagans and Jews and Muslims to steal land, but it's for Christ. So it's okay that we're violating everything he says about how to treat each other. Then you got the doctrine of discovery, and the Vatican says, go ahead and pillage and steal resources and subjugate people, but put up a lot of crosses and convert indigenous populations to Christianity. So Columbus is slaughtering the Taino people. This is the whole history of the faith, right? But there's another side to it. And that is that there's always been actual Jesus followers who resist the authoritarian Christian bullshit. So the Crusades are happening. St. Francis of Assisi quits the war, preaches peace, walks unarmed to a battlefield to host peace talks between a Muslim sultan and a Crusader army. Columbus is slaughtering the Taino people in the shadow of the cross, right? We're converting them, we're cutting their hands off and raping the women and selling them as sex slaves, but we're making them Christians. So Jesus will approve of us doing the opposite. And it was the Catholic priest on his third voyage, Father Bartolomeo de las Casas, who committed what might be the first act of protest by a white person in this hemisphere, who wrote to the Queen to protest the treatment of the indigenous peoples Columbus was enslaving. They knew in 1500 that this was evil. There were people there who knew this was against Jesus. Slavery props up Christianity. Slavery was propped up in this country by Christianity, but it was Christ followers like Frederick Douglass, the Quakers, Harriet Tubman, who resisted. Hitler, the greatest Christian nationalist of all time, but Christ followers like Dietrich Bonhoeffer martyred themselves for their Jewish brothers and sisters. Segregation, propped up by Christianity. Oh, Jerry Falwell opened whites-only schools, but it was a Baptist minister from Atlanta, MLK, who used scriptures and nonviolence to shame white Christian America out of American apartheid. And look at how many people have talked so many parents and grandparents out of homophobia in the last 30 years. There is an incredible tradition of Christian activism, and it's almost always in resistance to Christian authoritarianism. These believers got to choose which Jesus they want to follow.
You broach this subject in the book about Adam and Eve and the whole who came first debate. And
love it. Yeah.
I love the possible conclusion you drew.
Yes. Okay. So you may have this uncle or aunt, or coworker who's really, really into the whole book of Genesis as literal fact nonsense, right? I don't think the people who wrote Genesis intended it to be taken literally. And I go through all this, there's a night and day before the sun's created. Okay, sounds good. There's plants growing before the sun is. Okay, sounds good. Snakes don't have vocal cords. So either snakes used to be able to talk, or just God let this one snake talk, but then it sure seems like Eve's framed. And so many people need to believe this story, this parable is literal fact, because they have to justify second-class citizenship for women. Because believing Genesis is literal fact means you believe that women have painful childbirth and monthly menstruation and shitty wages for doing the same work as a man because Eve got suckered by a talking snake. That's the morality. So what I do is, I do this in my act, but I say just engage them and ask questions at the holiday party. Ask your loved ones, well, which Genesis do you follow? Because in Genesis chapter 1, God makes Adam and Eve at the same time in his own image. Okay, at the same time, but in Genesis chapter 2, God makes man first. And he gives man this big butch job of naming all the animals in the Garden of Eden. And eventually Adam realized that none of the animals would be a suitable mate for him. And I'm a teenager reading this, and I'm like, what the hell was that about? None of the animals were a suitable mate, huh? What were those auditions like exactly? How many species did Adam hook up with before ferrets? Goats? So then so God puts Adam to sleep and takes his rib and fashions that into Eve. So, which one do you believe? Genesis chapter 1, they're created together. Genesis chapter 2, Adam's rib, man's here first. Now, 9 times out of 10, being patriarchal, that's what authoritarian religion is. Your relatives will say, oh, I believe God made man first. And then took his rib and made the woman. They can't bring themselves to believe man and woman were equal in God's eyes from the beginning. They have to believe, even though women give life, dudes did it first. These people. So when they do that, just say to them, okay, so what you're saying is, you believe the first ever woman in all of history transitioned from a man.
It's just brilliant.
You'll never be invited back, but they'll never forget you. They don't
I would
believe
love to
this
see
stuff.
You,
They just do it
party.
to. Oh man, I get thrown out of some lovely Christian events, I got to tell you. But I do it because I quote Jesus directly, and that threatens authoritarians.
And all right, let's talk about this Saul Paul guy who you talk a lot about in the book. And like, why the fuck does he matter so much?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I never set out to do a chapter about Saul of Tarsus. I never thought when I started writing this book, I thought, how am I going to get the Iraq war in here? But I realized you cannot write a book or tell the story of what Christianity started out as and then what it turned into without talking about St. Paul. So I assume most of your viewers know the story already. But Saul of Tarsus is this guy who was a Pharisee and a Roman citizen. And the Pharisees were the religious authorities of Jesus' day. Some of them he got along with very well. Nicodemus was a pal of Jesus. You see Jesus hanging out with him all the time. Jesus may have been a Pharisee, right? Like I've learned not to use Pharisee as a shorthand for religious conservative authoritarians because they're the foundation of modern rabbinical culture, and lots of the Pharisees were groovy. But Saul was not. Saul was also a Roman citizen, a persecutor of early Christians, and a total dick. He was there for the martyrdom of Saint Stephen, the first Christian martyr. And Saul would go around and round up these Christians. You know, when Jesus died, there's only like 20 people in the world preaching his gospel. It was a very small movement. And Saul would try to round these people up and bring them back, and they would put them in cells or kill them. And he was really good at his job, right? So they started sending him outside of the city to places like Damascus. And that's where, Acts of the Apostles tell us, he had the road to Damascus moment. He was struck blind and he heard Jesus' voice saying, Saul, why do you persecute? Well, he thought it was Jesus' voice. Those guys never met, so he's assuming it's Jesus' voice. There were no recordings of it. So long story short, Saul's eyesight is restored. He renounces his ways, becomes Paul, and begins preaching the gospel. And it's important for a lot of reasons. First off, being a Roman citizen and a Pharisee, he had a lot more protections than the apostles who his old buddies were still killing back home. And because he was a Roman citizen, he could travel all through the Roman Empire and preach his message to the Gentiles, not just the Jews. Hence the name Paul, because that made it easier to market these new ideas. And essentially what Paul did was go around the Roman Empire and say, hey, yeah, it's like Judaism, but you know what? There's eternal salvation with God, and you get to have bacon and keep your foreskin. And it wound up being a pretty popular deal. And
sounds good to me.
Right? Like 3 to 4% rate of people transitioning to the religion per decade. Within 300 years of Jesus's death, the Roman Empire that murdered him took over his operation. Like it became the official state religion of the empire that had killed him. So Paul was good at his job. And he set up early churches in different communities like Rome, like Thessalonica, like, all the different letters he writes. And he's the epistle apostle writing letters to different people in different parts of the world about their particular concerns and communities 2,000 years ago. And Paul, who is not Jesus, but was Jesus's PR guy, did his best, right? He has a lot of love in his heart. He cares about people. He wants to be a good guy, but he's got a lot of hang-ups, and the hang-ups come into the work. Paul is the guy who's responsible for all the misogyny and all the homophobia in the entire New Testament. Jesus is the most incredible feminist. He breaks laws of his own religion to teach women, to treat women as equals. He talks to women he's not allowed to talk to. He allows women to touch him. I mean, Jesus and women was my favorite thing to write about because I learned so much about the barriers that he broke down. Like, you're not allowed to teach women, and he did it anyway. And he treated women as equals. There were 12 apostles. There's 3 women that went everywhere with him. But the men who wrote the book said it was 12 apostles and 3 groupies. Paul puts all that back in there. Women, submit to your husbands. You're not allowed to speak in church. All the sex hang-ups about gays. And in Paul's case, he doesn't really talk about gay men. He's talking about Roman temple prostitutes. And in Romans, he's talking about straight men who were partying too hard and God made them hook up with other guys because God didn't like them worshiping animal gods. But from there, they just say, oh, Paul, the New Testament hates gay people. So Paul does all of this. Eventually, Paul doesn't survive. The Roman kills him too. But he's the reason his version of Christianity survived because all of Jesus's friends were killed. So Paul's version is the one we've got now, you see. I say in the book, it's like if Ronnie Wood joined the Rolling Stones in 75, and then all the Rolling Stones got killed except Ronnie, but he kept the band name for himself and put out solo albums called the Rolling Stones. That's sort of what Paul's Christianity is like.
Hey,
so
Mick Jagger couldn't even put out solo albums.
Oh, I know. Mick Scott, come on now. We could put together a great album of all the good songs from all the Mick Jagger solo albums. There's some good ones and some good Keith albums too. But so that's Paul, right? So now you can say, well, second-class treatment of women, it's in the New Testament. Homophobia, it's in the New Testament, but it's not Jesus. Paul is not Jesus, and a lot of theologians believe that Paul may have been a closeted gay man in the first century Holy Land. And when you read his letters, it makes a lot of sense because he doesn't have a wife, which is very rare. And, he's so forgiving of sinners, yet he can't stand the sinful, unholy urges of the flesh. Either way, it doesn't matter because Paul's not Jesus. And Paul's homophobia should not ever cancel out Jesus's commandments to treat others the way you'd like to be treated.
Mm. Why is the Christian right so obsessed with gays and gay sex? And what is Leviticus to them? Like they talk about Mick Jagger, like that's their fucking rock star.
I know, right? I know. It's how they're raised. I was a terribly homophobic kid. I didn't get it from my parents. I got it from my peer group. Other boys taught me that not only should you be vicious to gay people, but God wants you to. Actually, to be a good person, you have to be bad to gay people. It's in the Bible. The kids today can't understand what it was like for us growing up in the 80s and the 90s when gays are in the alley waiting to get you, fat straight guy, just endless stupidity and ignorance. And you'll find that many Christians hate gay people until they meet one, until their son comes out. And then some of them double down on the hate, but then their hearts open. Dick Cheney, although not enough that he could fight for marriage equality. Let me point that out. But yeah, Rob Portman wrote the Defense of Marriage Act. And then his son came out as gay, and he realized, I don't hate these people, I love these people, and he renounced it. I kind of wish his son had come out as poor, too, but... So I was raised this way, none of it from my parents, and I grew up working in theater. And when I was 13 years old, I had an amazing experience where I was saying some homophobic shit, and a gay costume designer who I loved very much and didn't know he was gay because I was only 13, called me out and smacked me down and told me to shut up. And I realized instantly, oh my God, Brent's gay. Oh my God, and so is Winston, so is Liam. Oh, I love all these gay men. They drive me home after rehearsal. I'm a dick. And I didn't understand as a teenager, how can my religion tell me to hate these men when I love them and I know they're good people? I couldn't figure it out as a kid. And you know what this gay costume designer did? He was a Christian and forgave me. And came to my high school graduation, came to see me play Tony in West Side Story in my high school. Like, I was raised in part by some wonderful gay men who forgave me for being a stupid homophobic teenager. I didn't know as a kid that Leviticus doesn't apply to Christians. No one ever told me that Jesus forbids homophobia in the Sermon on the Mount. I hadn't read the book. There were no tools. I wrote this book for me when I was 17, so I could have understood things better and reconciled how the love of Jesus is not compatible with the homophobia of douchebags.
Well, this is a perfect segue into what I'm about to say because it speaks to what you're talking about. In the book, you have a great quote. It's, you can't groom a kid to be transgender, but you can groom a douchebag to believe he's Christian. That's it right there. That is it right there.
Look, you want a spiritual test? Look at how they treat transgender people. I mean, where in the works of Jesus does he say anything that's against gender-affirming care? Like how is that a violation? How is being loving, how is being kind to the most marginalized group? Oh, they're torturing children, blah, blah, blah. How many parents have you talked to? I've got trans kids in my family. They're not cutting off genitals. By God, the lies these people tell. But this is what weak, spiritually people have to do. They have to have someone lower than them that they can beat up on. Right? Like Christianity is supposed to be about how much can I love those who are lower than me? Fundamentalism is how can I prove that I'm superior to those who are lower than me? And whether it's homophobia, whether it's Islamophobia, whether it's anti-Semitism, If you're arguing that your belief in Jesus makes you better than anybody, you don't freaking believe in Jesus, bro. You do not. His movement's all about humility and going to the margins to give love and acceptance to people. And even Paul in Galatians says there is neither male nor female in Christ. Right? Like show me how being kind to trans people is in any way of Jesus. If anything, this is a vulnerable minority that has a suicide rate 9 times higher than straight people. It's almost like, wow, they could really use a religion based on love and acceptance to come to their rescue. Real Christians would be welcoming the migrants. Real Christians would be embracing their Muslim neighbors. Real Christians would be giving love and understanding and compassion to these mentally abused transgender kids. Real Christians already know this, but fake Christians need to believe they're better than somebody else.
Well, you write in the book that kids are way more likely to be sexually abused by a priest than someone transgender.
It's not even close.
Not even.
I mean, we have the arrest records in every state to prove it. Like, we've had more Republican senators arrested in public men's rooms than transgender men, and the lies, the fear. Oh, they'll put on a dress and go into men's. Well, men have been able to put on dresses and go into women's rooms since we began women's rooms, right? Like, is it happening? Like, are guys doing that all over the place? They're not. And I'm not saying we shouldn't respect women, and we have to have this dialogue, and we have to respect the privacy of women's spaces, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just here to call out the hatred of it. You know, it's like they have to have a minority. And you know, Andy, 20 years ago, it was Muslims. That's who we were allowed to hate. When I was a kid, it was homosexuals and feminists. That's who we're allowed to hate. Undocumented immigrants, right? Like literally, we're commanded to welcome them by this Bible, but no, we're allowed to hate them too. And I got sick of it. I understand people who are nervous about transgender folk, who don't get it. I understand guys who are grossed out by it. I get all of that stuff. But if you're going to call yourself Christian, by God, you're fucking well obligated to love and to go past your hangups, because that's what Jesus commands if you believe that stuff. Jesus is not about domination. He is about transformation. The guy is not about superiority to anybody except the person you used to be.
Yeah.
And there's a great passage where they're passing a blind guy, and the apostles say, Jesus, why is this guy blind? Did he sin or did his parents sin? And Jesus says, nobody sinned. Maybe he was just made that way so the glory of God could be shown through him. And that's kind of the theme of the movie Conclave as well. If you're looking for an excuse to hate, you're legally allowed to do it in this country. If you're looking for an excuse to hate and calling yourself a Christian, those of us who've read the Gospels are obliged to call out your deeply stupid blasphemy.
Yeah, you know, there's that brilliant scene in Annie Hall when Woody's waiting online at the movie theater and the annoying nerd behind him is yapping about, I forget what's his name.
Marshall McLuhan.
Marshall McLuhan, thank you. And Woody Allen's like, oh, God, he's just sighing. And every time he hears the guy say something, and finally he turns around and he starts debating him. And the guy's like, I'm a professor or whatever. And he goes, well, yeah, I happen to have Marshall McLuhan right here. And then Marshall McLuhan says, you know nothing of my work. I feel like if Jesus was here today, that's what he would be saying to all these Christians. Like, you people know nothing of my work.
That's why I began the book with the epigram quote, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? You know, he says it. He says these people worship me with their lips. Like, he keeps telling us over and over again who the fake Christians are. That's Matthew 25, where he says the ones going to hell. And again, he's all metaphorical, but he's like the ones who say they're Christian, the ones who say they follow him, but who don't want to help the sick, who don't want to help the poor, who don't want to welcome the stranger, who aren't kind to those in prison. Jesus tells us, these are my fake followers. It's like his memo to the Heritage Foundation.
It's such a dangerous place we're living in today. In a perfect world, when readers are done with this book, what do you want them to think and feel and do, perhaps?
That Christianity is an obligation for kindness and love and acceptance, not that you're better than anybody else. That's what I'd love to do. You know, we haven't even talked about my weird upbringing, because my mom was a nun. Usually that's the first thing we do in interviews. I love this. My mother's a nun, was a nun for 16 years. My father was a Franciscan brother. And I wrote this book for them. I wrote this book for all the good people who use this book to justify love and service and care for the less fortunate, not those people who love the smell of their own flatulence. You know, spiritual people use religion to become better people. Fundamentalists use religion to pretend they're better people than you.
Yeah. John, I don't sling shit, and I got to say, I've done over 400 conversations like this, and I think this is the most important conversation I've ever had, because it just speaks to so much that's wrong in our world today and in our country today. And I really hope, I don't know how many MAGA people I have listening to my podcast. Jen, how many are we up to?
6.
6, okay.
Nice. It's probably the same 6 guys who call my SiriusXM show every night.
Yeah. But I hope people are buying your book. I hope people are listening to you, because somebody's got to get through. And often comedy and satire is the best way to do it. We've seen that through history. Comedians often can talk about shit in a way that nobody else can.
Well, that's the trick, right? Billy Wilder said, if you're going to tell people the truth, make it funny or they'll kill you. And Jesus told his truths in parables, right? He told it in metaphors. You know, when he says, I am the bread of life, he's not saying he's made of flour and yeast. The guy was a poet. And that's a better delivery system for truth. Jesus knew, if I tell parables like the good shepherd, don't put your light under a bushel, right? That was much easier for people to remember the message he was giving, especially people with low education. And it made it easier for him to avoid getting in trouble with the authorities when he could express his truths in metaphor, which comedians kind of call satire. But it's a tricky sale. But for me, again, I spent 13 years pitching this book, and God bless Simon & Schuster. I finally sold it on a verbal pitch in an office in Manhattan, and they believed in it, and Avid Reader Press, and I'm so grateful for it. And Andy, the people I've had write to me who say, this validates my experience as a Christian, and the folks who write to me and say, this validates my experience as an atheist, is just what I was hoping for with the book.
Count me in that group.
Word. Well, some of the best Christians I know are atheists, I hate to tell you. And some of the most godless heathens I know are very loudly devout believers.
And some of my best friends are atheists.
Yeah.
I don't know why I said that.
Me too.
John, thank you for coming on and sharing your inimitable wit and wisdom on a very important subject.
Andy, it's an honor to do this, especially at Christmas time. And I just want to thank you again for having me. And thank you for doing this podcast. I'm a fan. I'm a listener. And I love what you bring into the world. And it's an honor to be here again.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Take care.
And
Enjoy the holidays.
Your whole team. You too. Peace.
Bye-bye. This episode was produced and edited by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud for Radio Free Rhinecliff, with additional editing by Maddie Rosenberg, music by Andrew Hollander, and graphic design by Cricket Langell. And with a special thanks to our sponsor, The Epicurean. Again, thanks for listening. Please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to the Backroom with Andy Ostroy YouTube channel, where you can watch full videos of our interviews. See you next time.